Well, hello everyone. Today in this video I'm going to be talking about a new topic, which is arrays. Now, before I say anything, and by show of the hands, who is really sick of staying home and wish to go back to regular life? Now I'm showing my both hands. Anyway, let's get back to Java. Today we're going to start with a new chapter, and this chapter is basically all about arrays. Now, before I say anything about arrays and how to create arrays and all these kind of details, it's very important to understand the concept. Now, since the beginning of this semester, we've been creating a lot of applications, and we're processing a lot of data. Now, the real question is, so far, how many variables did you create in your applications? 5, 10, 15? A number. But again, we're talking about data structures, and basically programming is meant to be was meant to be created to process data structures. And by data structures, I'm talking about thousands and thousands and millions of variables of values. Now the question is, what if I have 100 value, or 200 values, or 300 values that I need to process? Would I just go ahead and create a variable for each value? That would be a lot of variables. Now here's the thing. A good programmer will try to get his job done by creating the minimum number of variables. Yet again, I'm talking about, let's say, for example, students in KCKCC. So we basically have, I heard, like around 6,000 students or something. So for each one of those students, let's say they have an ID number, and I'm supposed to process those ID numbers. So do you think it's a wise thing to do to create 6,000 IDs variables to store the IDs of the students? No, that's not how it works. Basically, we have what we call data structures. And a data structure is basically a way that we can organize multiple values under one name. And the very basic type of data structures is array. And a lot of other data structures are basically built based on array. For us, we just need to understand what is an array and how does it work. So today we're going to talk about arrays. Now, what is an array? Now, before I do anything, let's go back to the definition of what is a variable. So here we go. This is my creating a variable. I will call it val. And I will assign the value 10 to it. As simple as that. This line that I'm going to highlight is basically a variable. It has a data type, it has an identifier, and it has a value that's been stored inside that variable. Now, if we go back to the definition of a variable, we said it's basically a reserved space inside the memory with an ID or identifier, and that space inside the memory will be stored to store one value, which is in this case is 10. Now, what is an array? Well, an array is also a variable, but instead of storing one value, I can store multiple. And that basically should let you start wondering, what a good idea. So, instead of me having one variable for each value, I can put all my variables into one value. All my values in one variable, and that variable is basically what we call the array. So let's go back here to the definition. Even though I don't like to call an array a variable because it's not a real variable, but we'll just assume that, or just understand it right now at least, as a variable that can store multiple values. So let's go back to this, the example of KCKCC. If I want to store all the IDs for the students, and instead of creating an ID for each student variable, I can create one variable array, call it student ID, and inside that variable I will store the 6,000 ID numbers for each student. And that's here the key of variables, of arrays. Now, there are a lot of details when it comes to arrays. There are a lot of applications when it comes to arrays. And one thing you should know and always remember, arrays and for loops are the best friends. So, now that we know what is an array, which basically, again, I'm going to define it again for you, it's a variable that can store multiple values, we should understand, we should know the following. How do I create an array? How do I assign values to an array? How do I have access to those values inside that array? Those are very three important operations, and I'm going to go with them one by one, and then we have a lot of more details that I'm going to jump here and there during my explanation for the course, for this chapter. So first of all, how do I create an array? Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how do we create a single variable, and with a twist or a little bit of modification, you will see that we can create an array. So let's go back here, integer, AAR. Now, that's me declaring an integer. If I want to create an array, all I have to do is, after the integer, you put 2 square brackets. Am I done? Not really. After that, you come here and type equal new integer, and then you open the square brackets, and in this area, you tell me how many elements you want to have in that array. For example, I'll go with 10. This line here is me creating an array called ARR, and there are 10 elements inside that array. Now, this here is a magic number. We don't want to do that. What we can do, basically, we can come here and type final integer array size, assign it to 10, and then use it to indicate the size of the array. And that's basically what is an array. Now, as I said, I can put 10 directly. That's going to be accepted by the compiler, but it's usually recommended to have a variable with the final, because why does it have to be final? Well, not necessary. If I take it out, it's still going to work with no problem, but it's recommended to do it that way. Final integer array size. And I'm going to use that as an indicator for this array. I'll just create one array here using this method. Now, when I create an array using this statement here, I will have 10 values. Now, the question is, what are the value of those values? Like 10 values of what? 5, 6, 7, 10? Well, when you do it this way, using a primitive data type integer, the values automatically will be assigned to each element will be 0. Now, the question is, what if I don't want to have 0? Well, there's another way to do that, and I'm going to show you that, integer array 2. Instead of typing new integer, I'm just going to open a curly brace and close it, and I'll just type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 10. Now, note, a side note here, you notice here that I didn't specify the size here. I didn't tell it's 10. Well, basically, the size of the array is going to be basically decided based on how many elements do you have here. This method here, it's called creating an array and initializing it at the same time. So the values of the arrays, the first element is going to be 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. Here, since I didn't specify the values, they're going to be all set to 0. Now, another way. What if I don't know what is the size of my array? For example, I want to create an application for a classroom, and I want to ask the instructor about how many students does the instructor have. So what I can do, I can come here, create a scanner, user equal new scanner, and we'll just put system.in. And then I'm just going to come here and type an integer. I will call class size. And I'm going to say system.out.print how many students. And then what's wrong with this system? System. Okay. Now I'm going to come here, class size equal user dot next integer, and then put a semicolon. And now what I can come here, I can create a new integer. Let's call it new array. Sorry, called AR3, and I'll say new integer, and here I'll say class size. Semicolon. Why are you complaining here? Oh, of course. Take that out, and here we go. Now, if you're going to have a chance to learn C++, you will notice that this, as simple as it is, it's a big deal in C++, and you will never be able to get it done this simple. So thank you, Java, for making something a little bit easier comparing to other programming languages. So bottom line, out of all these three, those statements that I created, what I want to show you here, basically, this is how you create an array. It could be the size set to be constant, or you can actually ask the user to decide what will be the size. The bottom line, when you create the array, you must have the size set. What does that mean? That basically means after creating the array, if you go with 10, then it's going to be 10. If you go with 100, then it's going to be 100. If you go with 1,000,000, it's going to be 1,000,000. You cannot change the size by increasing it or decreasing it later. And that's going to be a problem, and there's a solution for that. This is the solution, and the problem is not basically covered in this class. But what I'm saying here, whenever you decide what will be the size of the array, then that will be the size of the array until your program is terminated. Now, this part basically cover how do we create arrays. Now the question is, how do we have access to those elements? For example, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What if I want to actually assign values to those elements? Well, we need to understand a new concept today, which is basically what we call the index. Now, index basically, let me just define it right now. It's an integer, and it has to be an integer. It must be an integer. And that integer is going to present the location of that variable that you want to have access to in that array. And one very important concept here is you must and you have to start counting from 0. So what does that mean? It means 1 here, which is the first element, the index of first element here is 0. And the index of the second element is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So when you have 10 elements in your array, the index of the last element basically will be the size minus 1, which in this case is going to be 9. So index basically will give you access to the element that you want to change, you want to print, you want to see what it is. Most importantly, you need to understand that you're going to be counting from 0. So let me just show you here one example. System.out.print line. Now, how do I have access to those elements? For example, let's take AIR2, for example. What I'm going to do, you know what? You just type square brackets, and then you tell me what is the location of that element that you're trying to have access to. For example, if I want to have access to the value of 5 here, now what I need to do, what is the index of 5? So you start counting from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if I put 4 here, that will give me access to the index of 5, and you'll see that 5 is going to be printed. Okay, how many elements? Let's go with 12. And as you can see here, I got 5 printed on the screen. Now, let's go back to this array here. What if I want to assign values to that array? Now, since we have 10 values, let's go ahead and do this. ARR1 of 0. And let's put the value 9. And again, if I want to have access to the second value, I have 10 values, remember. So starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and finally we got 9. So those are my 10 values. Now, yeah, I want to assign the value 9 to all of them. And that basically will get the job done. Now, when I started talking about arrays here, I said arrays and for loops are the best friends. So, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to show you that instead of me typing all this, I can actually replace that with a simple for loop. And instead of having 10 lines of code, I just need to have 2. And that's kind of a big deal in programming. reducing the size of your project. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use AAR, where is it, 3, this one, for that matter. So look what I'm going to do here. I'm going to come here and say, for, and look at this, integer I equals 0, I is less than, now what I need to put here, I need to put the class size. So if the user, for example, entered 10, I plus plus. If the user entered 10, then I will start with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 9, which is basically 10 values. 10 by itself is not going to be included here, so it's wrong to put less or equal, and I've noticed a lot of people or students do that. So start counting from 0 always, and as long as I, which is your counter, less than the size of the array, you can keep going. Now, what I need to do here, and look at this, this is very, very important. If I just come here and type ARR3 off, this is basically what we call it, the square brackets off, I equal, let's just put the value 100. I'm going to assign all the values to 100. Now what's going to happen here? At the beginning, remember there's a for loop. When I equal 0, so there's going to be ARR3 of 0. And then I is going to be increased to 1, and then to 2, and to 3. And every time you increase I by 1, we're having access to the next index. And then after that, I will assign all the values that I have to 100. And that's basically how I said. For loops and arrays, they are the best friends. Let's see, what else do we want to do here? I'm just looking at my notes, trying to figure out what's next. Yep. The second part that I'm going to talk about here is basically how do I show the elements of the array on the screen? Well, just like we did with the for loop, I'm going to create 3 of those for loops now to show the elements for each one of those 3 arrays. So for the first one, for ARR1, let's just take this one away, take this one away, take this one away. So for the first array, which is ARR1, we said array size is 10. So I can come here and type 10. And for this one, well, this is tricky. I'm going to leave it for now. The third one is array size. I'm going to copy that and put it already here. Now the question is, what do I put here? And this is going to be a little bit of a problem here. Let's look at this array here, array 2. How many elements do I have here? Well, you can count them. They're 10. But the question is, what if you don't have access to count? What if something that could change before you get to this point? Again, is there any way I can actually measure how many elements that I have here without the need to actually manually calculate it? Well, there is a way to do that. And I'm going to do that. Integer size ARR3 size. Let's just call it that way. Now what I'm going to type ARR3 dot length. Let's see here. Semicolon. No, that didn't work. What is going on here? There should be a way that there's a function that will tell you how many elements you have inside an array. Let me try to remember. I'm going to do a quick search here. Java size of array. I'm pretty sure I'm missing something very simple. Here, how to define the length or the size of an array in Java. Find the length of an array in Java. Yeah, there's a member called length. Did I misspell it? Let's go back here. L-E-O. Yes, I think I misspelled it. No, I didn't. Show me an example, please. Okay, here we go. Integer, print. Here it is, length. You call it array, that's what I did. Length. L-E. Without this, actually. Oh, well, he complained about it before. Control-C. Put it here. Okay. So here we go. This is me measuring and figuring out how many elements do I have here. Now, the idea here is very simple. System dot out dot print. I'm going to go print, not print line. And this type, I'm going to type ARR1 of I plus a space. I'll put semicolon here. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it here. And this time, I'm just going to have to change this one to be 2 and this to be 3. Where is it? 3. And here, well, I need to give this before actually the printing. This is the right place for it. Now between those, I just need to go to the next line every time I'm done with the previous loop. So I'm just going to come here, print line. This is just to go to the next line to have the spaces between all these print statements. Correct? No, Control V. I actually don't need it here. Control C. Control V. Control V. Let's run this for now. And I'm going to go back here. So, how many students? Let's go with 5. And here we go. This is the first array, all 9s. This is the third array, second array. Well, why is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Let's see here. There's something fishy about this. So, this will print the array number 1, which is all 9s. This will print the array number 2, which is supposed to go to 10, but it's just showing me 9 for some reason. I'll figure that out in a second. This is AR3, which is basically 5 as well. Array size. This is class size. I understand this 5. That's correct because I chose 5. But I'm not sure why is this one going for 5. Even though this is AR2. Well, let's see here. Probably it's because of this. Oh, look at this. AR3. I'm supposed to go with 2. Remember. We're talking about this 2. I was using the wrong array. So let's just go ahead and fix that. Okay, let's go back again here. I'll go put, let's say 7, and here we go. Why is it showing me 5 again? Did I ask for that? Yep, the 5th element. Here it is. So here we go. Those are the 10, those are the second 10, and those are the 7th elements of the array number 3. So if I want to summarize what I just said, this is what I defined what is an array. I showed you how do you create an arrays, how do you have access to the elements of the arrays, how do you assign values to arrays. You know, here in this part here, instead of actually assign 100, I can actually ask the user to give values to that array. If you want, I can do it right now. Let's just go ahead and do it. I'll just comment this section here, and I'll just say system.out.print enter a value for the array. And then here I'm going to come here and type ARR3 of I. Remember, we have a user scanner, user.next integer. So instead of assigning 100, I can actually let the user decide how many values you want to enter. So for example, I'm going to go 7 again, and here we go. Enter the value for the array. I'll go 12, for example, 3, 5, 9, 11, 32, 17, and here we go. Those are my 7 values that I just entered by the user. So this, again, how we manipulate arrays. This is how we do it. Now, so far, let me just go and show you some examples, some points to worth mentioning. All the arrays that I created were integer. Does that mean I can only create integer arrays? No. You can create an array of doubles, floats, strings, characters, Boolean variables, any type of arrays, data types you can do. You can actually create an array of a data type that you create. You remember how we used classes to create objects like cars, points? You can create an array of objects, and I'm going to show you an example about that later. Let me just go back to my notes to see if I forgot anything. So this is how we create arrays. This is how it works. I'm going to have a break, and I'll be back in a sec. Well, let's keep going now. 4 topics are left to cover in this lecture. which is basically we have something called parallel arrays. We're going to talk about smart loops, and then we're going to talk about how do I create an array of objects, a user-defined objects, and then we're going to talk about how do I deal with methods when it comes to arrays. So let's start with smart loops, which is the easiest part. Now, in this example here that you can see, I created a very, very easy or simple for loop. And then in this for loop, I was able to show the values. Now, let's look at this for loop here. This is another way to processing arrays using a for loop. And in this way, in this loop here, I'm asking the user to enter values. So basically, I'm manipulating the values of those arrays. Using a traditional for loop will give you access to the variable, to the array elements, but also at the same time will let you process the data if you need to. For example, here I was changing the values for each element. Here I'm not changing the values, I'm just showing it on the screen. Well, we do have another technique that would give us access to the elements of a for loop, but you cannot change the values. You can only show them, or you can change the value itself, but you cannot change the element for the element itself. What do I mean by that? Let me just show you what do I mean by that. We have a special for loop called a smart for loop. And a smart for loop basically is very simple. You just type for, and then in this area, you would declare a variable, for example, integer, val, and then you put a colon, and then you put the name of the array, for example, ARR3. You open a parenthesis and you close it. Now, what am I doing here? Basically, I can come here and say system.out.print line, or just print, and I'm just going to type val here. Now, before I run it, I just want to explain what am I doing here. And I want you to pay attention. I'm using R3 here. So basically, whatever I do here, I have here, I will have it here again. And then after that, let's just go ahead and put a print line. Now, let's just focus on what's going on here in this for loop. Well, basically what I'm saying, this for loop will go with a number of iterations that equal the size of this array. And for every single iteration or loop, I will take a value from this AAR or an element, and I take the value of that element and assign it to val, and then I'm going to show it on the screen. So basically, val by itself, it's a variable that will hold the value for all the elements one by one from this array. And then it's going to be shown here. Now, let me just show you something here. If I said, for example, plus plus val, what am I doing here? I'm increasing the val by 1. Now, remember, this is very, very important. I'm processing val, not AR3. So if you want to think about it, I'm taking the first element from ARR3 and assign it to val, and then val is changed, not ARR. And that's what I meant by this will only give you access to them, but you cannot change the values of the array itself. This is basically what we call smart for loop. Now, smart for loop is a little bit more efficient than a regular or traditional for loop, and it's only used for showing the data, or you can process the data, but you should know that the original value will not be affected by any change would be applied. So that's basically what we mean by a for loop. What I'm going to do here, I'm just going to, let's go ahead here and comment everything in this area. And of course now he's complaining about AR3, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy, for example, this one, and I'm going to call it ARR4, and I'll set AR4 here. Now if I run it, I want you to notice, I forgot to put a space. Now if I run it again, as you can see here, I got 2, 3, all the way to 11. That's what's going to be printed. But again, let me just use one of those for loops and put it down here. Change this one to be 4. And remember, this is supposed to be 10 because that's the size of this. You would notice that the original array will not be affected by it, which basically this part. Let's go ahead and put that system line underneath it. Run it again, and here we go. So this is basically what we mean by a smart loop. Let me take this away. I'll just keep the one here. Now that we covered the smart loop, let's go ahead and talk about parallel loops. Well, parallel loops is a concept. It's not a syntax thing. It's basically a way that programmers figured out to process certain situations. Now, I'm going to give you an example. For example, let's imagine I have a classroom that has 20 students, and every student have an ID number. So I can come here and create an integer. Let's create a string ID, and let's put the size to be equal new string, and let's put 20 here. So this is my first array that contains 20 elements. Each one of them is a string. Now, what if I want to have the grades of those students? Well, I can come here and say integer, and I'll say grade equal new integer and 20. Now, what you should understand from this is an array, and this is another array. Both of them, they share the same size. Whenever you have a case where you have an array that will store a certain type of data for a group of people, for example, and you have another array that will store another type of data for the same group of people. Remember, same group of people. We're talking about students here. It's important to understand that you need to organize both information stored in those two arrays in a way that, for example, when you go and have access to the first element in this array and the first element in this array, we're basically talking about the same student. For example, let's say I'm going to use Danielle here as an example. Let's say Danielle was the student that I chose to have the index of 0, which basically the first element in both of those arrays. Now, what do I do here? Basically, I need to understand that the first ID in this array is going to belong to Danielle, and the first grade in this array is going to belong to Danielle as well. So that's what you have to understand whenever you create parallel arrays, that each array by itself is going to store a specific type of data for a group of people or a group of readings, and then you have another array that will store different types of reading or information about the same group of people. You should understand the indexes here. Each index for this array and this array basically are pointing to the same person. For example, if I go to the index of 4, index 4 could be Cody. And then, so when I access to the 4, since it's index 4, that's the 5th element because we start counting from 0. So the 5th element will have the ID of Cody, and the 5th element here will have the grade of Cody. And that's basically what we mean by parallel arrays. Okay, so again, do I really need to use parallel arrays? Not necessary. It's just a method that you have. What you can do, you can create a class for students, and you can store objects of students, which is basically what I'm going to be covering in a sec. Now, this is basically what we mean by parallel arrays. Now, let me go and do something different here. Let me copy this. Push it all the way down here. Now, I'm going to talk about array of objects, and this is very, very important. So, in this file that I have here, let's say, where is it? We're talking about Unit 8. Here's Unit 8, arrays. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Resources, and I'm going to create a new class. Let's call it Point. So I'm going to create a class called point. Now don't include static void method here because we do have it here. So here we go. This is my point. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a private integer x and y. Every single point has the x and y value. I'm going to create a constructor, public point, and in this public point, integer x, integer y. And then let's just go ahead and assign them this x equal x, this y equal y. What are you complaining? Oh, sorry, this is not C++. This is Java. Okay. Let's call a function for printing. So void public print point. You know what? Let me just explain something that's very, very important. Usually, whatever class you have, you will always want to have a function that will print everything. So this is not a syntax that Java asks you to do, but it's recommended. Every time you create a class, your own class, it's recommended to have a function called toString. And remember, toString basically has the same job that I was just mentioning, is to print a function. Now, let's start here. Void public toString. What are you complaining about here? The type is missing. Well, it's void. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go ahead and do this. System.out.println. And this print line, I'm going to type. Let's just give it a really good presentation. So, double quotations. I'm talking about a point here. So I'll put this dot x and then plus. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put a comma space plus this dot y plus, and let's close the parentheses. Oops, he doesn't like it. I think I'm missing this one. Okay, so what are you complaining about here? Public. Oh, sorry, you have to switch those. Public void. Again, he doesn't like that. The return type object.string. Oh, sorry. It should not return. I just realized what's going on here. It should return a string. Okay, and instead of printing it on the screen, return and take this out. Let's see here. Why are you complaining about this? Let's take this away. Yes, that's basically what it is. So instead of printing something on the screen, what I'm going to do, this toString method is going to return a string, and that string is basically this portion here. I'm going to show you how it does work in a sec. But again, I'm just creating a very, very simple class here. It's called point, that has two values, has a constructor, and then has a function toString that's going to return a string. And the string that's going to be returned basically is going to take this format that I'm showing you here. Okay. Now let's go back to our array class. What I can do here, and this is very important, remember, previously in all these methods, or sorry, all these examples that I just mentioned here, I basically created arrays of primitive data types. Integers, I think I did a string somewhere. Here it is. So what if I want to create an array of an object that I created? A user-defined object. Well, that's a possibility. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to create 5 points, for example. So I'm going to come here and say point. That's array. And then I'm going to call it P, uppercase P, equal new point. and you put 5. Now this is very, very important. This basically will create 5 points. Now the question is, am I going to call this default constructor, this constructor here? No, that's not going to be the case. What I need to do after this, usually, you go p of 0, remember we have 5 of them, equal new point, and then you specify the values of x and y. So I'll go, for example, 5 and 6. And this is supposed to be uppercase P. And again, the same thing has to be done for all these 5 points. Of course, I can have a for loop and then ask the user to assign the values of x and y here for each one of them. But you know what? Let's do that. Instead of 5, let's let the user decide how many points he wants to. Since I'm going to use the user, so I need to have the scanner. Do we have the scanner? Here is the scanner. I'm going to copy it for now. Control C. And let's put it here. Integer points. And then before we actually use it, let's just go ahead and show a message to the user. System.out.print how many points you want to create. I just remember something. Here's what I'm doing whenever I have a chance, whenever I don't have any thing to do for work. I am watching this YouTube video. It's basically Python for data science. Now, data science is a big deal these days, so I'm trying. I know Python, but I'm not sure about the data science, so I'm trying to figure out that. That's something I'm doing at the same time. I'm trying to learn how to create video games. That's what I'm doing whenever I have a chance. So what I'm trying to say here, just use your time doing something, since we're just staying at home. If you don't have any assignments, of course, to do. Back to Java. Okay, so I'm asking the user how many points you want to create, and then I'm going to say user.next integer. Don't forget the parentheses, and then here put points in this area. Now that I know how many points I'm going to create, let's go ahead and create a for loop. Now this is a place where you cannot use a smart for loop. It has to be a regular for loop because we're trying to change those values. Integer I equals 0, I is less than points, and then I plus plus. Okay, of course there's a space missing here. Now all I have to do here is to come here and create 2 integers. Integer my x and then my y. And here I'm going to ask the user to enter the values of x and y. So let's just copy system out. Let's change this to be what is x, and then let's do what is y after that. Control C, what is y. And since I'm asking a question, let's put a question mark. And here, my x equal user, is that what I called it? Yep. Dot next integer. And then for the other variable, we'll do the same. My y. Now that I have my x and my y, all I have to do is to come here and say p, uppercase, remember, that's what we call it, of I equal new, what was the name of the point? And then in this area, instead of the parentheses, you put the values of my x, my y, put a semicolon. And that's how basically I am going to go ahead and show the assign values by the user using this point class. Now, if I want to show them on the screen, I'm going to do the same thing here. Let me just copy this. Remember, I'm going to take a lot of this out. All I want to see the values. Now remember, I do have a function here called toString that I'm going to be using here. So what I do, I come here, and this is very important to understand. It's basically system.out.print line. Now, if I just get here, create a function called print, then I'm just going to have to call the print. But look at the beauty of this toString method. What I can do, I just come here and say p of I. And you will notice that this p of I basically will call the function toStrings and it's going to return the string. So let's give this a try. So how many points you want to create? I'll go with 3. So what is x? X is 1 and y is 1. 2. Now again for the next point, I'll go 5 and I'll go 10. For the third point, I'll go 9 and I go 2. And here we go. As you can see, 1 and 2, 5 and 10, 9 and 2. And that's basically, this technique is used a lot. Let me just put it that way. You can create objects, and from objects you can create a class, and then from the class you create an array of objects, and then for each object in that array you're going to have to actually call the constructor for it. Now this basically could replace the parallel arrays. Instead of having 2 arrays, one of them for this ID and one of them for the grade, you can create a class for a student and have those 2 variables here and get the same job done using this technique here. You have both of them. This one is recommended. It's more object-oriented style than the parallel arrays. But again, you have those 2 options, and you need to know both of them, of course. Okay, so we covered the parallel arrays, we covered the smart arrays, and we covered objects. Now, the one part left is methods. Now, when it comes to methods, this is really, really critical. So, what I'm going to do here, let's imagine I want to change a point. Not point. Let's go ahead and go back to the arrays. I'm going to create, let's go back and use this array here as an example. And you know what, since I'm using that array, let me just cut it from here and put it back here. So array 4, I want to use that as an example. Let's imagine that I want to increase every element by 5. So I will have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 6, 7, 8. Oh, sorry. Again, I'm just going to increase every single one of those elements by 5. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come here and create an array function. So this function basically is going to return nothing. So let's try to remember. Public static void add 5. That's my function. Now, what I want to do, since it's called add 5, I am going to come here. Just remember, let's do it here in this area. I will say add 5, and let's pass AAR4 to that function. Of course, now he's complaining. You say, well, it's empty up there. What I want you to understand, and this is very, very important before I start doing anything, when you pass an integer, a single integer, you're passing by value. That basically means if I come here and just say I'm going to pass, let's say 5, or I'm going to pass x, and x basically is an integer. That basically means you're passing by value. You're passing a copy of that variable. Now, when you pass an array, now here's what you have to understand about arrays, array form. Array basically is an object. And when you pass an object, you're not passing a copy of the object. If you think about it, just remember I said that before. Passing a copy, basically, if you want to understand it, it's like me making a copy of my original document and passing you a copy. So if you change your copy, the original one will not get affected. But again, with arrays, we're not passing copies. We're actually passing the reference. And basically, by passing a reference, I mean the original copy will be passed to you. So if any change you apply in the method will be reflected on the original value, which is the array of 4 here. So let's go ahead and do that. Here, I'm going to have an integer, and it's going to be let's call it A. Now, so let me go back here. When I'm going to call this function here, ARR4 is going to be passed to A. Now, any change will be applied to A will be reflected on ARR4. So let's go ahead and do that here. I'm going to go and say for integer I equals 0, I is less than the size, which is 10 in this case. It's recommended to do it this way, a.length. Well, it's not recommended to do it that way. Let me just tell you why, since we are in that topic. By typing it this way, that basically means every iteration you're going to calculate the length, which basically means it's going to make your process slower. What I can do, I can come integer s equal the length, and I'll replace this with s. So basically means I will do the calculation for one time only. That makes it a little bit faster. So a, uppercase A, sorry, of I plus equal 5. That basically means I'm going to increase it by 5. And remember here, I don't have to return anything because I want to keep the reflection, the change that I applied for A back there. So let's go back here. This here will show you, well, yep. Let me take this plus plus away. Let's see here. Yeah, let me take this plus plus away. This function here will show you before, and this function will show you the after for the same ARR4. And let's put another one of those print lines here. Oops. Where's this coming from? Oh. Here we go. Not system. Not what I asked for. Control C. Oh dear God. What am I clicking? Here. Control C. Control V. Okay. I'm not going to be concerned about what's going on here. I'm just going to be focusing on the function part here. So let's go ahead and run it. And here we go. Look at this. This is the beginning of it. And this is after I call the function. And as you can see here, every single element is increased by 5. So bottom line here, what am I trying to say here? When you pass an array to a function, AR4, which is an array, you're passing it to this function. Any change will be applied to this A here will be reflected on this array here. That's something you have to understand. Now the question is, what if you don't want to do that? Well, there is no way you cannot do that. That's basically how Java works. You pass an array, you're going to process the array, and that's going to have effect on the original one. Unless you actually create another temporary array and you assign the values to that temporary array and then you process that temporary array, that's another way. But again, usually Java is more concerned about memory management. So in this case, for example, I have 10 elements. What if I have a million of elements? Well, passing it by copy, it's a duplication for another million values inside the memory, and that basically means the memory is going to get filled with data. That's not what Java wants. Java wants it to be simple and fast. This will be the end of this video. Right after this, I am going to go ahead and talk about some applications of arrays, and then after that I will have 2 examples to talk about. So I'll see you guys in a sec, and have a good day. Bye.